Now, another aspect of community or fellowship is identifying your role within the wider community. We don't have to read this, but 1 Corinthians 12, a lot of people are familiar with the passage. If you're not, go take some time and read it, because it compares the church community, it compares the church members to a body, and that each member is an organ of the body, if you will, or some part of the body that performs an important function. And you need all the parts for it to work properly. And some of the parts may have a higher profile. You know, I think that my eyes have a higher profile than my appendix did, you know. But the appendix used to be very important. It was a place that it took bacteria, it took germs out of food, because we weren't always real good at preserving our food or preparing it and storing it. So that kept us from getting botulism or other forms of diseases. But now that we are so keen on preparation and sterilization and so forth, our appendix has become obsolete. But not the case back at time. My little toe, your little toe, anybody's little toe, is considered to a degree non-essential. I don't really want to lose it, and the toes work at balance, so you need to have an adjustment period if you were to lose your toe. Anyway, in a body, every part has a function. Every part is important, but every part is different. So discovering what your role is in the body made for a better functioning body. And there was this synergism, if you will. There was this energy, this mix of energy where Jesus builds the church through what all the different parts do. So you got to have your role. You can't just sit back and say, okay, Jesus, build the church, bring them in. It's an active process of building, of edifying the church. So the role that everybody had is important, and it's still important today. One more aspect of fellowship that some people also consider an aspect of worship was breaking bread, going from house to house and breaking bread. Breaking bread has always been and still is a social function, a social activity, that if you have a meal with somebody, well, that's a way of bonding. A lot of business deals are made over lunch and so forth. And just sitting down and eating with somebody is a less formal way of forging a relationship with them. So breaking bread from house to house, yeah, that was part of their fellowship. But breaking bread usually or often refers to communion. And so breaking bread house to house would have been house worship. There were some house churches, because when it's illegal to be practicing what you're practicing, you don't want to put up a big building with a sign. Right. That's a little dicey. So you just go from house to house and practice what you believe. They were in the temple. And the early church didn't really have a clear distinction between Christian and Jewish. So early on, they were carrying out their completed Judaism at the temple. And, you know, people knew what they were doing, okay, but didn't always, wasn't always legal. That the more the church grew, the more it got in trouble with the powers that be. So breaking bread could be worship, could be a kind of worship. They also had something called an agape meal, a way of sharing fellowship with one another. It was considered to be a recreation of a Passover feast quite often, a recreation of a Seder, which is what communion is based on. So the breaking of bread is kind of a double category thing. And I want to look at worship more a little later. Another thing they did was with prayer, that they devoted themselves to prayer, and books and volumes of books have been written on the subject of prayer. I think it's one of those essential functions that also is very challenging for a number of reasons. And I will look at it in more detail, but the point I want to make now about prayer is that prayer is more than just asking. Prayer defines a relationship. Prayer is how a subordinate individual comes to a superior to ask something. It's a recognition that, okay, this person holds power. He or she is not a peer. This is not an equal relationship. I'm asking someone who is superior, so I'm going to be very humble and accepting the answer. There's an emphasis today on the boldness and the confidence of prayer. Yeah, we can be bold, and we should be, but we also have to remember to whom we are praying. That, boldness and confidence are important, but don't confuse those with presumption and arrogance. Those do not impress God, and I do believe that there is a very big difference between humility, or I should say boldness, confidence, and arrogance. If you're giving God a to-do list, you're probably crossing over into audacity. If you are presenting certain cares and hoping for a certain outcome, which we all do, right, well, then we're more in the prayer category. And if we're willing to say, well, God, I kind of want to see things go this way, but whatever you have in store, that will be fine. I will accept that. That's certainly a sign of true humility. You may not have an easy time accepting it, but you still accept it. So those are, in a nutshell, some of the practices of the church. Another word we might have for this would be discipleship, a continual growing, and there's certainly much more to it, but this is some essential stuff mentioned in Acts chapter 2. There are also a few results of the activities of the church at the time. The church found favor with all people, and a little note here, except for the Jewish authorities, and that came out pretty soon. But the general population that knew about the church, even if they didn't join the church or agree with the church, they could say, oh, those guys are okay. That group, I don't really agree with what they're saying, but they sure act nice. They're respectful. They're a good group.
They're not teaching go out and riot or anything like that.
That's right. Little political point in there, I see. But it's true. Right. Absolutely true. In fact, on that point, when Christian persecution ramped up, especially under Nero early on, when Nero would do these cruel things like he would have a nighttime garden party, and he would have 2,000 Christians crucified, and he would light them on fire and use them as torches for his garden party at night. So, that's a pretty cruel, inhuman thing to be doing. Yeah. The one thing we don't see is Christians organizing and fighting against Rome. Even the Jewish people had a revolt against the Romans. They lost miserably, but they had a revolt. Christians. That would have been in the 2nd century BC. It's called the Maccabean Wars. Okay. And the revolt was against the Seleucids, which were a group in Asia, and they won. Okay. They achieved freedom for like 15 years, and then Rome came in. Now, Rome did revolt against the Romans in 70 AD and didn't turn out well. That's when Jerusalem was leveled, the temple was destroyed, and the Jewish nation disappears for about 1900 years. But they still united. Okay. The Jewish people still united and rebelled. Christians never did that. You can't go to the history books and find the Christian-Roman Wars. Right. Because they had a different philosophy and a different approach. Ironically, Christianity spreads the quickest and does best under duress.
Yeah. I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, outsiders are watching saying, what's so important about this belief that they'll give up their life?
Yeah.
And they looked into it and they found out that, yes, it is worth more than life itself. But these Christians, they found favor because of their lifestyle. They didn't riot. They didn't push back. They weren't pushy or arrogant. At least they weren't supposed to be. But they were bold, and they were clear in what they did, and they would stand up to authorities in a convicted way of sharing. They just didn't fight back. Another aspect is the miracles that were performed, which is a topic today which can be controversial. Do miracles still happen in the church today or not? I tend to think that they do. But the thing about miracles we have to understand is that for the most part, we're not in control of them. You know, we're not the ones who are deciding when it's time for a miracle. Right. That something speaks to us from God, and we are aware of the fact, I believe, that it's time for a miracle, and then we accept what God has said he's going to give us. But we're not the ones that are making the decision about who gets healed and who has the demon cast out of them, if they even have one. We're not in charge of that. There was certainly awe and fear among the general population, kind of like, man, those guys are really cool. I don't want to get near them, but man, they're really cool. That's really awesome what they're doing. I'm going to go home now. Yeah, I don't want to get it. I don't want to get on me.
Because they knew about the persecution.
They knew about the persecution. They also, yes, actually, that's a good statement.
Yep.
Even in the early church, even when it began, if you believed, you were ostracized. And a lot of people didn't go for being ostracized.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a good point.
Right.
Yes, but still there was a sense of awe. Nobody else was doing this stuff, at least not with any kind of regularity. The Jewish leaders claimed that they could exercise, and we get reflection of that through the scriptures, but they weren't known for it. People weren't flocking to them for healing or to be exercised or have their son or their brother exercised. Just Jesus and just the early church were known for that. So a unique phenomena showing the power that was going through them. Power can be scary. Even if you like it, power can be scary. Last point I want to make about the effect is that God added daily. An important reminder that church growth, that evangelism, spiritual decisions are not a matter of strategy and planning and effort. Certainly, those can be a part of our obedience, but ultimately, well, using the analogy, we plant the seeds and we may water, but it's God who brings the interest. If you're a gardener, you're probably aware of the fact that why something does not grow is as much of a mystery as why some things do grow. But we don't really have a lot of power. Just so we plant the seeds and make sure they stay watered, we hope for the best and hope they come up, but that's a power beyond us. And there's a little bit of mystery and surprise behind it too. So same thing with evangelism, same thing with spreading the gospel. Yeah, we find opportunities where we can appropriately share it, but it is God that makes it successful, and he's the one that adds to the church. Now, speaking of evangelism, there is another topic I want to address about the church, a core concept about what we're supposed to be about, which is about missions, both local and foreign. And the classic verse on that is Matthew 28, 16 through 20.
Okay. This is the very end of Matthew. The Great Commission. Then the 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain where Jesus had told them to go. When they saw him, they worshipped him, but some doubted. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, of the and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I am with you always to the very end of the age."
The classic verse, the Great Commission, the clearest exhortation by Jesus to the church about sharing the gospel. And it's got a few important key points here.
So this is obviously after his death?
Yes.
Okay.
This is in those 40 days between the resurrection and the ascension.
Yep. Okay.
And he told the disciples to meet him. So it's probably maybe 2 weeks after Easter,
Okay.
give or take. They did spend some time in Jerusalem, and then we find them in Galilee. Probably because they weren't looking for him in Galilee. The heat was off. They could be a little more open, a little more relaxed.
Yep.
But Jesus meets them there. The first characteristic he talks about is, "I have all authority." All authority. And authority relates basically to permission you are given, or the charge you are given to execute a certain function. You know, police can go out and direct traffic.
Right.
They would be pretty upset if I did, unless there was a specific something going on. But as far as a major event, yeah, you don't want me directing traffic. That's not going to turn out nearly as well. You don't want me investigating a crime scene.
Right.
They have the authority. They also have the ability, but the authority is just the permission or the responsibility of carrying out a certain task. So Jesus is saying, here I am, I've got all authority, which is going to cover what he says next. And what he says next, a little bit misunderstood, although not a huge issue. People often take the 4 verbs, going, make disciples, baptize them, and teach them as 4 different commands. Actually, it's not. It's one command. The one command in there is make disciples. And the other verbs pretty much describe how that's going to happen, or how that should happen.
See that? Because that's kind of what you got to do.
Yeah.
Let's make someone to say that you are a Christian. You would be taught and then be baptized eventually. And
Right. Right.
sense.
Yeah. So it's in going, and people often miss the going. Today we depend a lot on drawing people into the building. But really, we also got to be leaving the building. We got to get out amongst the population to make some kind of connection. Because there are people out there who are interested.
Right.
There are opportunities out there that you can take to talk about your faith and explain things to people. And that's really important in order to make that connection and to bring them in eventually, and not just for church growth. You know, it's not just for the offering time that you're doing that. That's a pretty self-serving motivation. But having a concern for souls and responsibility for their growth, that's important. That's the attitude, and that's what we do to fulfill Jesus' command. We go, we baptize, which also involves the faith commitment at the time, and we teach. We teach them all things. But again, those are just descriptions of how making disciples is done. Now, the last thing that Jesus does is that he says, "I am with you always." I am with you always. And if I can connect a few dots, Jesus starts out his statement by saying, all authority has been given to me. He's got all authority. Now he's given them a command with some descriptive elements to it. And then he finishes by saying that I am with you always. So the one who has the authority to give this command is also going with the people he has commanded. So we have an authoritative figure with us spiritually all the time. So anytime we have opportunity, we can share because we have the authority to do that. Jesus has given us the authority. A lot of people have the objection about, well, who do you think you are telling me that? I mean, why do I have to believe your way? It's like, well, who gave you authority? I mean, I have the authority to tell you this. You can take it or leave it. That's not the part of it, but I have the authority to share this with you. Doesn't really matter what I believe. Actually, I was talking with someone not too long ago, and he used the same line about, why do I have to believe the same way as somebody else? Why do I have to believe the same way as you? And what I said back to him was, doesn't matter if you believe the same way as me or not. That's not the point here. And frankly, I'm Baptist. I assume disagreement. That's kind of a big part of our history. But what is important is, do you believe the way God does? Do you believe what God believes? Because that's a pretty crucial issue.
Right.
And that's what Revelation is about. So, we have the authority to share, God's beliefs and what he wants for people to be doing. We have the authority to share God's salvation. And that is one of the primary functions of the church, to spread the faith. So thank you very much for joining us. I hope these different parts add some insight into your understanding of the church, how it's important to be gathered together, to be effective and efficient in sharing the things that we share, doing the things that we do. Thank you for your time and attention. And as always, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them. But again, thank you very much, and thank you, Phil.
Very good. Thank you.